This is a question we got from Rose, who got in touch on X, formerly known as Twitter, after Monday's episode to cover the return of David Cameron, formerly known as the Prime Minister, to government. Rose asked, how is a Foreign Secretary judged? At the Home Office, you have immigration figures. At Health, there are NHS waiting lists. Is he likely to improve his reputation because it's harder to fail as Foreign Secretary?
I think this is such a good question because I think we talked about it actually in our emergency reshuffle recording about how Foreign Secretary is an oddly, it's an odd position. It's a little bit adrift from the rest of government. It's sometimes not that political really because you're off on foreign trips, often acting as a diplomat rather than someone who has to weigh in on domestic policy and has an impact on people's day-to-day lives. So it's less easy to pin things on you. But of course, there's been so many scandals involving foreign secretaries in the past. Like just look at recent ones. So Dominic Raab's utter failure over the Kabul evacuation. Mm-hmm. He didn't have to resign over that. In fact, in the reshuffle that came afterwards, he was made Deputy Prime Minister. Yeah. The only time he had to actually leave cabinet was because of bullying allegations. And then you had Boris Johnson as well, who made some real mistakes when he was Foreign Secretary. He wasn't judged to be very good by his officials, not least when his clumsy words meant that Nazanin Zaghari Ratcliffe had to stay detained longer in Iran than perhaps would have originally been the case. But he only left over checkers, over the Brexit checkers deal, and actually ended up being Prime Minister afterwards. So there is this precedent for actually Foreign Secretaries getting away with it.
Well, you also forgot Liz Truss, who went to Russia and wore a big furry hat and was humiliated by her counterpart, Foreign Secretary or Foreign Minister, caught up in not knowing the details of a particular place. And obviously he planned that and it was very clear that he was trying to catch her out, but also he caught her out and she wasn't very well briefed on that. I think the main thing is, as you said, you're judged on not embarrassing Britain. That's the first metric. Can you represent Britain on the world stage without there being some kind of humiliation or gaffe that makes us look really bad as a country? So it's almost a negative metric as the first one.
Yeah. I think the complicating factor is perhaps the Prime Minister is so much more responsible for foreign policy than they might be for healthcare policy or home policy. So you, for instance, associate Gordon Brown with the big corralling of response to the 2008 financial crisis much more than you would David Miliband or Tony Blair with Iraq over Jack Straw or whatever it may be. So I think because the Prime Minister takes such a keen interest in foreign policy as the head of government, that the Foreign Secretary sometimes is reduced to the background and also doesn't take the key decisions. Do you either invade this country or do you sign this big deal or whatever it may be? Because those things are normally of such importance, it's led by the Prime Minister. So I think that complicates it. I also think with Cameron, one of the reasons they're bringing him back is because he was Prime Minister. So he's got all of these contacts. I was speaking to quite a few Foreign Office people this week. They were clear that because he's got those contacts and because foreign policy is so much about personal relationships and he's already had 6 years to build those, he will be much better at fitting into that role in such a short period of time than someone else might have been. So that's one of the reasons he's there. How do you judge it? I think Rachel's right. So much of it is just about not embarrassing the country. And if we are going to always align our foreign policy with the US, as we increasingly seem to be doing, then it's not as if we're acting as an independent agent, whatever James Cleverly might say, on the world stage. Obviously there's lots of policy to be made, but it's not as if you can do whatever you want irrespective of your allies, for instance.
I think the other thing is also at the end of your tenure as Foreign Secretary, are Britain's interests being carried out in various parts of the world? Is the US listening to us? Are we an influence in Europe, even if we're not in the EU anymore? Are we being heard when it comes to issues of China in the Indo-Pacific? When Britain says, actually, this is our policy, this is our intervention, are we taken seriously in those rooms, in those spaces? And there are a lot of things that go into that. One of them is having the knowledge and being sort of well briefed enough that other countries can see that you actually know what you're talking about. One of them is the relationships. Do other world leaders know you and respect you, even if, again, they don't agree with you? And one is about it is a diplomatic role in the sense that you have to really understand where other countries are coming from and what the internal domestic politics in those countries are. And if I speak to this person, will they be able to broker a meeting with this other country? How do I get into that room? What's the chain of relationships, the chain of events that mean that we get to make our point? It's a lot of behind the scenes stuff as well as flashy foreign trips where you're photographed.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that springs to mind when you were talking, Rachel, was actually that is an area of potential vulnerability for Rishi Sunak, because you are sort of competing with the Prime Minister for that role, aren't you, as the country's head diplomat? I mean, David Cameron, when he was talking to civil servants when he arrived in the Foreign Office, talked about his fondness for the foreign trips that he went on as Prime Minister. And we know that, Rishi Sunak will go on many of these trips and already has been. So you do have that. They play quite a similar role, I think, and of course, Cameron, having been Prime Minister, looks prime ministerial. And he's also taller. And, there's been a lot of, you wrote in your morning call, Freddie, about him looking the part, which, is an egregious part of British sort of psyche. But he does. And there is potential there for, imagine if Cameron and Sunak go on a foreign visit somewhere. Is the head of state there going to be wanting to have a proper chat with Sunak, or perhaps want to catch up with Cameron over the last time they were,
Yeah, I mean, Rishi Sunak was just a fresh-faced MP back in 2015 when David Cameron was still Prime Minister. And the other thing is that the only successes in Rishi Sunak's premiership, I think, have been on foreign policy. Restoring some sense of normality with Europe, getting the Windsor Framework, some of the progress that we were talking about yesterday on the immigration deals. These are things that he can point to. Yeah. And has he just handed out one of his key assets, one of his key strengths and skills to someone who's taller than him, but who also has that stature, that international stature that he doesn't necessarily have, being quite a fresh Prime Minister.
Yeah, because look at who gets the kudos. Like, James Cleverly became the most popular among Tory members, if you go by the Conservative Home poll.
Liz Truss and her trade deals.
Ben Wallace, when he was Defence Secretary, popular. And, domestically, Boris Johnson wasn't as popular, even though he was the face and probably very much the driver of the very close relationship that Britain established with Ukraine. But it's those lieutenants who actually get the warm glow, and the Prime Minister is blamed for everything happening in the country.
Yeah, but I don't see never say never in British politics. Last week, I didn't think that David Cameron was coming back as Foreign Secretary. I don't think David Cameron is going to be challenging Rishi Sunak for the leadership of the Conservative Party anytime soon. So at least you have someone in that role who isn't a direct
I didn't mean
competitor.
a direct challenge. I meant Labour's whole position of
well,
Sunak being weak.
You never know.
You never know. I know you never know. But if you look at it like we had Boris Johnson, who used being Foreign Secretary to burnish his own credentials with varying results. Liz Truss absolutely did that when she was Foreign Secretary, and both of them used their experience to then go on and fight leadership challenges.
Well, I think the final thing that we should add on how you measure the success of foreign secretaries is how the consulates work around the globe. That's one of the key things that the Foreign Office is responsible for, whether British citizens are looked after abroad.
Thanks so much for watching. We'd love to know what you think. Please make sure you leave your comments below. And if you enjoyed watching this podcast, you can watch more of our videos on our YouTube channel. And don't forget to like and subscribe.